Good day, and welcome to Q&A Social Security Disability Today Special Edition. As you are aware, and as I've made very clear, on my weekly show that I do on Sundays, I make sure I tell everyone that I know it's not possible for me to address all the questions that I have in great detail, because I try to provide you as much information as possible, that all you have to do is send me a message or a comment and specifically say more detail about a specific topic, and I'll be more than happy to address it for you. Well, today we have one of those topics. So allow me to welcome you to Q&A Social Security Disability Today Special Edition on heart condition. Now, first of all, a lot of times people will ask me about various conditions, about whether they think they can get disability for that condition. Here's the easiest way for me to deal with that. It's basically to tell you what I look for when I'm determining whether or not someone has a good heart condition case. Here's what I look at. First, I've talked about this before as it relates to the steps by which Social Security determines you're disabled. They look at 1, are you working? 2, do you have a medical condition that keeps you out of work for 12 months or more? 3, do you meet any of the criteria of any of the listed medical conditions? If you don't, does your medical condition keep you from doing the work that you used to do? And then if it does it keep you from doing anything else? All right, now that we've gotten that out the way, let's look at it. What happens if somebody comes to me and says, Mr. Reeves, Attorney Reeves, I got a heart condition. Do you think I can get disability? All right, let's kind of go down the line here. First, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. My first question is, what kind of medication are you taking? Now, why is that important? Well, as I've indicated in previous videos, the type of medication you take lets me know about the severity of your condition. If you're taking bare aspirin or something over the counter, it may indicate that you have some issues, but it might not really get me all excited. But if you start telling me that you're taking blood thinners, it might catch my attention. If you're taking nitroglycerin or nitro tablets that you put underneath your tongue, that usually is a good indicator that you're probably experiencing bouts of chest pains, because that's typically when they prescribe the nitro tabs, which lets me know that you may have a more severe condition. Second question I'm going to ask you is, who's treating you? Now, are you getting these because you've been complaining about chest problems and your primary doctor is giving it to you? Or are you going to a cardiologist? Keep in mind, if you're going to a cardiologist, it's more likely than not that you're going to have more specialized tests done. And that'll be my third question, is what kind of tests have you had done? Have you had the EKG? Have you had the echocardiogram? Have they done a catheterization? Those are things that's going to let me know that your doctor believes that your condition is one that warrants more proactive treatment. Have they had you do a stress test? These are all the questions that I need to know, because that lets me know that someone has taken a more aggressive role with regards to evaluating your condition as it relates to your heart. Now, then I'm going to ask the question, have you had any procedures done? And have you had any attacks? Let's pause for a second here and let's go one by one. When I'm going to ask about the procedures, I'm going to say, what kind of procedures have you had done? Like I said, have you had the catheterization? Have you had any stents put in? Okay, which is basically a little small tube that expands your valve. Have you had any bypass surgeries done? Have you had any open heart surgeries? Those are the things that I'm going to want to know about. What type of situations have you had? Meaning, what type of procedures have you had? Then I'm going to ask you, what is your condition itself? Now, when people think of heart conditions, there's a few that tend to pop up. Arrhythmias, which has to deal with, in the grander scheme of things, a regular heartbeat. You may see people get diagnosed with congestive heart failure. You may see people get diagnosed with myocardial infarction, which basically means they had a heart attack, or angina, which is chest pains, things of that nature. Now, I'm going to also ask, has anybody done any testing which call for an ejection fraction? Now, for those of you who've heard that magic number, an ejection fraction typically is, and I'm not a cardiologist or a doctor, so of course they'll tell you in a little bit more definitive terms, but typically the ejection fraction really is a good indicator of how well your heart is pumping. I believe it's based on the left ventricle, if I remember correctly. And what happens is the magic number that tends to let you know that your condition is really severe is that if your ejection fractions are regularly below 30%. That usually lets you know that your heart is really not functioning at the area in the mannerism that it's supposed to. Now, here's the kicker, because somebody asked the question, how does that relate as it relates to younger people and older people? I know I've talked about that before, but let's kind of touch on it a little bit now. Remember, the regulations are really just set up in such a way that they tend to favor you as you get older. If you note, and I think I've mentioned this in other videos before, kids 17 years old and younger are going to have a lot harder of time proving that they're disabled as opposed to an adult. But the adults are broken into 4 categories. 18 to 49, that's the younger individuals. It's really tough to prove you're disabled unless your condition is real severe. Once you get to 50 to 54, which is closely approaching advanced age, or advanced age, which is 55 to 59, or closely approaching retirement age, which is like 60 to 64, if I remember correctly. The higher you get in age, the more likely Social Security is going to make a determination when they look at your work experience and your education. It's going to be a little bit more favorable towards demonstrating that you're going to have a more difficult time adapting to a new type of job. Now, let's kind of go back to the biggest thing that I need to know when I'm talking to you about your heart condition. How does it affect you? Here's some of the things that you got to keep in mind. This is some of the things that I expect to hear when I'm talking to somebody about their heart condition. They're going to tell me they have chest pains, shortness of breath. There may be some dizziness. There may be some side effects from the medication. Their issue with fatigue. Those are things you would reasonably expect to hear from someone who legitimately has a heart condition. Now, people, be mindful when you know these things. You know, I got a dad who's had multiple bypass surgeries and he's still working. One of my close friends just had a bypass surgery and he and I about a year apart and he's still actively working. But then I know of another young man who is not working because his heart is of such a severity in terms of the problems that he's having where he's not able to work. So what does that mean to you when you have a heart condition and you believe that you should be found disabled? Heart conditions are one of those conditions that I put into the same category as like what I call asthma and diabetes and hypertension, things like that. That if you do what the doctors tell you, in theory, you should be able to go back to work. So your kicker is this. You need to be able to ensure that the doctor is accurately documenting that your condition is still problematic despite the treatment. Now keep in mind, don't try to fake the funk now and be slick and try to say that your condition is worse than it is, because doctors can tell when you're faking. They do these tests so they can tell, the reason why you get the EKGs and the echoes and the stress tests and everything is so that they're trying to determine, is the actual testing comparable to the problems that you're having. So here's the key. Couple of things. One, if you can get a doctor to give you a medical source statement kind of describing how your condition is affecting you and how long they've been treating you, that's helpful because it gives Social Security evidence that someone, preferably a cardiologist, who's intimately familiar with your condition, has evaluated your condition and has rendered an opinion. Second of all, don't be shy about telling them about the problems that you're having. If you know you're having shortness of breath, if you know you're having bouts of dizziness, if you know you're having bouts of fatigue, don't keep that information to yourself. Why? Because Social Security is not with you when you're in that room with your doctor. They can only rely on the medical records that are there in front of them. And I have news for you. I've never had somebody's doctor come with them to a Social Security hearing. So, what does that mean? They're going to have to rely on the records that they have in front of them. So you need to make sure that you are letting someone know about the problems that you are having. Okay? Also, keep in mind, look at your condition objectively. If you're saying, oh, I got chest pains, but you're going to a primary doctor and taking Bayer aspirin, you've never had an echocardiogram, a catheterization, a stress test, EKG or anything, Social Security may not look at your condition with as much scrutiny as somebody who may have had an open heart surgery, has a pacemaker put in, and is still having low ejection fractions. So you want to weigh all that. And I always tell people that these cases are inherently tough, so don't be surprised if your representative that you reach out to is scrutinizing them. Because like I said, these cases are really, really tough. All right, everyone. Again, I want to thank you very much for joining me for Q&A, Social Security Disability Today, the special edition dealing with heart condition. As always, if you have a particular topic or where I've discussed something and you'd like for me to discuss in detail, by all means, Just leave a comment or send me a message in the YouTube, and more importantly, specifically say more detail. So this way I will know that I need to do a dedicated video especially for the issue that you'd like for me to address. I hope that I was helpful for you today. My name is Anthony Reeves, attorney at law, and again, this is your Q&A, Social Security Disability Today.